Hello everybody, Prepper003 here today with another Preparedness Essentials video for you. And this one is going to be discussing the topic of shelters. Now right now I'm going to just right off start by explaining why I view shelters as a Preparedness Essentials for an SHTF scenario. Now right now, all throughout the years, humans have been able to survive all throughout these adverse environments, whether it be exposure to sun, the exposure to temperatures, wind, rain, or even to the point sometimes even fire and disease. Now, why does that affect us as preppers? Well, it allows us to avoid the elements, for one. So as I mentioned just before, with that being allowing you to avoid the elements, if you have to bug out, you're not going to have the comforts of a house or something like that. So being able to avoid the harsh environments of having to actually bug out, having some type of shelter on you is going to be something that's going to be a key thing. Even if it comes to bugging in, having your shelter reinforced against human threats and the like is going to be important as well. Now, the next point about it is that it allows you to hide your position and your preps. So what I mean by that is that it's going to allow you to be able to prep in privacy, and on top of that, even if something does happen, you can actually disperse your preps inside of your home or inside of your shelter, if you will, to the point to where somebody might not be able to find it as easily if you don't have it in one centralized location. So having a shelter really helps, like for example, having a root cellar for some of your food, then having other foods in some types of caches or caches, however you want to really pronounce that word, or having your shelters provided and dispersed throughout, like having hidden compartments inside the home. Or if you have a mobile shelter, having hidden compartments inside that area where you're storing your foods and your water and your firearms and stuff like that. So that's one thing that does help, is being able to hide your preps and being able to hide your location and kind of do it on the down low under the radar. The next thing is going to be avoiding some types of SHTF scenarios. Like for example, if you have a storm shelter and a tornado comes through, you are listening to the radio or listening to the warning signs and everything else, and get your family into that shelter before the tornado hits your home or hits your area, you're going to be in a much better place and in a much better situation than those around you that did not prep and did not have that shelter in place beforehand. Just as one example. Or you can think of it into a doomsday bunker to avoid some type of fallout, to avoid some type of conflict or riots, what have you. Now that I've got that done and talked about the kind of why for the situation, I'm going to touch on the types of shelters. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the bushcraft shelter, something you can hand make and make out in the field with just very few tools, maybe some cordage and a knife. Now, that's very good, but a lot of those are going to be, unless you do extensive work with it and take a lot of manual time and effort into it, aren't going to be very stable and very long-term shelters. Now, like I said, if you put your time and effort into it, you can make yourself a really effective long-term shelter. But then again, you have to know how to do it. And the next one is going to be more impromptu shelters on something you're going to be able to do on the fly and in a much minimal amount of effort, time constraint as well. And that is going to be tarp shelters and man-portable shelters like tents. But I'm going to break that down into pretty much two categories for the man-portable one. Now you're going to have your tarps, whether it be something that's a more camping bug-out style tarp like this one right here, which can easily fit into a cargo pocket, or something that's much more heavy duty, or something like this right here that you mainly kind of use for covering cars and stuff like that, but that does wear over time, as something like this right here might actually be able to hold up to it, the abuse of having to be inside of a bug out bag and be taken out, set up, and what have you. As something like this right here, the material can stretch, the material can fade and everything else over that exposure. So you just have to realize what material you have for your tarps and what they're going to be able to take for abuse. You also have to deal with the weight constraint. That's something like this right here is going to be much lighter than something like this right here. Now on to tents. And I break tents down into kind of two categories as well. You have your more heavy duty military style or your mountaineering style tents. Then you have your more commercial style tents that are kind of designed for recreational purposes, nothing too serious, just kind of maybe weekend camping or something along that type of line. Something like this right here is going to hold up to a lot more abuse than a $40 tent at Walmart. So you just have to realize that there are some kind of drawbacks between the two different types of tents and what you're getting for the money. Now, the biggest thing in between the tarp man-portable tents and the man-portable tents as well is going to be that the weight and the space. As you can see, something like this right here, which I've used for quite a while, this Stasha takes up about the same space as a cargo pocket, as this ICS shelter right here takes up a pretty good amount of space inside of a bug-out bag or a ruck. So you just have to realize that this is coming with a lot more weight and a lot more space consuming than something like this. But something like this requires, sometimes, depending on how quick you are at setting up your shelters and everything, a little bit more time to set up than this right here, and may not provide all the coverages. Like this one right here, it can guard you against bugs, it can guard you against rain, it can guard you against wind and everything else, and it's pretty watertight, as something like this right here is not as insulated or as well protecting you from the environments and the different types of things that are inside those environments. Now that we're kind of done with those two type of topics right there, there's one last thing that I really want to talk to you about with tents is that if you have a family or multiple people inside your bug-out contingency, you may want to have maybe 1 or 2 tents inside that, just because depending on the situation, the weather can change very drastically, very quickly. You might not have the time to set something like this up or just the right way you want it to be as effective as something like this right here in a tent. So that's just one of the two kind of drawbacks. Now, it's up to you on what you guys want to do in the end, but I'm just giving you kind of my experience with it as the tarp compared to tent. And right now, for me, I have a family of 4 with 2 small kids. So having a tent and a tarp are beneficial to me inside of my bug-out bag for that situation. So each person is different in what their situation is and what they're preparing for. Now I'm going to discuss on to the next part of the preparedness essentials for the shelter, and that's going to be vehicle-borne shelters. And those are going to be kind of the RVs, the vehicle campers and such, things that are pretty much attached directly to your vehicle or require your vehicle to move from one location to the next. Now, there are a lot of good ones. Like, for example, there's a lot of off-road camper units that you can get that would be very durable for that type of usage. I do know that from my experience using an RV as a bug-out vehicle, especially taking it even somewhat into off-road situation, isn't the best. We've had to get, at a militia event that we were out to, we had to get a RV that somebody brought out there unstuck out of the mud. And it took pretty much 3 trucks and a group of men to be able to push that thing out, and it wasn't on that bad of a situation. I mean, it was just a small muddy area, and it just completely stuck that thing there. Now, if you outfit it right, I'm sure it would work fine, but it depends on the RV and what situation that you're going into and the environment that you're in as well. So that's pretty much it. And the biggest thing when it comes to vehicle-borne shelters that you're just going to have to deal with is it does require that vehicle. So once you run out of gas, you're pretty much stuck in that fixed location unless you can somehow find some other type of fuel to get that vehicle to move from one point to another. The next point is going to be fixed or static locations. And I'm going to break those down into 2 categories as well, and that's going to be soft and hard static locations. The soft categories are going to be kind of your more cabin out in the woods, a small house, that type of thing, to where the material isn't built up and it's not going to survive or very easily survive a long-term siege on the house. And what I mean by that is that your standard American home, unless it's built out of a harder material like bricks and concrete, you can easily, within just a couple of minutes, if it even takes a couple of minutes, with a sledgehammer, you can easily break through the exterior of a house and get into the interior through the exterior wall very easily. I've helped a couple of friends out demolishing a few rooms and everything and demolishing a house, and it was very easy to get in from the outside with just a sledgehammer and an axe. So that's just one thing you have to realize, is that the homes that we live in aren't that sturdy. That's why you see such heavy damage to these homes in natural disasters, for example, like you see just the extensive amount of damage done by windstorms like hurricanes and tornadoes to these houses, as compared to your hard buildings like your office supply places, to where they're built up to hold up to much more abuse and long-term usage and more kind of natural disasters, if you will. The next point about that with these locations being soft is that they're not going to be able to survive a heavy invasion force, to the point to where, like I mentioned just a few seconds ago, if somebody wants to get in, they're going to be able to get in, and those disasters are going to be able to get in if they want to as well. To the point where you're pretty much, if it's a gray man situation, you're fine. But if it's in any type of conflict, a static location soft house might be easily dominated and taken out in some type of siege warfare if you're trying to bug in. And that's one thing you just have to realize. Now there's going to be your more hard targets. And what I mean by that is going to be like your hard locations, like your bunkers, your military forts and bases, government agencies, factories, things that have multiple layers of security rather than just a wall of a house and maybe a couple of guys armed with rifles that have reinforced the main entryways and the windows and such. So what I mean by that is that there's multiple contingency plans for those locations. Even for a bunker, you have a way of getting, most of them at least come with a way to get out from a undisclosed area, so that while you have people attacking the main hatch, you can be getting away in some type of egress location or throughout some type of trapdoor, something like that. Or you have your type of military bases or your factories to where there's multiple levels that you have to break through to get into the main plant. Like, for example, you have a fence. You might have a wall that then you have to get through locked doors that are heavier steel doors than your standard door on a house. And then you have to get through other types of security systems if there's power as well, with electronic locks and such. So there's just much more different types of security than it would be for a standard house with maybe one or two families in it. Then on top of it, you might have more security personnel for those locations as well. Like, for example, if you have a bunker, you might have cameras set up. You might have other type of external warning systems and other things like that you would not generally have for a standard house in a suburb. Just as kind of an example of the difference between my view on soft targets and hard targets. Now, the biggest thing is that hard targets can be a very appealing option to take, as a soft target might be able to ride under the radar. So just an option. Now, a lot of these are kind of talking into more of the man-born threat than the elements, but I will say that if you are going to be in a fixed static location, you are having a lot more opportunities to have a lot more preps on hand than you would being on foot. So that's really much it that I really wanted to talk about. I really wanted to just make my kind of points heard and opinion heard on why I think it's an essential for us as preppers to have multiple forms of shelter, starting from our foundation as a household down even onto our rucksacks as having some type of shelter. Even if you are very confident in your capabilities of being able to make a bushcraft shelter out in the woods, maybe having some type of shelter to keep yourself covered in the meantime while you're making that shelter out of the sticks and woods in the out in the field would be beneficial to you. So I want to hear your guys' comments. I want to hear what you guys are kind of using as your shelters, what your plan is as far as shelter usage. Are you guys wanting to do more of a bushcraft your own shelter after an SHTF scenario, or if you're kind of like me where you have different tiered systems for shelters as well? Like, for example, this shelter right here, this kind of commercial tent, I have inside my vehicle at all times in case we have to bug out. Like we see over in California with those people that lost their homes because of that wildfire, having some type of shelter to easily be a grab and go is going to be key, because it might not be this huge disastrous SHTF scenario. It could be something that could happen that could be very localized and affect you, but still be very devastating in its effect. So thanks for watching. I really appreciate you guys commenting. I really like to read your guys' comments down below and what you guys put and your opinions on the topics. So remember, those that prepare for today survive tomorrow.